Alright guys, so we did the top 5 best older flagship phones for 300 bucks. Today we're just going to be focusing on your normal, mid-range budget smartphones for 300 bucks. So starting with the Samsung Galaxy A32. Now this is the 4G. I have both the 4G and the 5G. I prefer the 4G version because of the specs. So this is actually a little bit under 300 bucks and it's got a plastic frame, plastic back, nothing too fancy. I think I like the design on here, especially the back. It's a very clean design, especially if you get the right color with this phone. Also, the thing that I love about this phone is the Super AMOLED display at 90 hertz. So you get a 90 hertz display at 6.4 inches, 1080p 411 for the PPI. It's a very nice Samsung panel that we've all know and love. Very colorful, it gets pretty bright, has a little water drop notch, a little bit of bezel, but overall the display is really fantastic on this device. It's running Android 11 with One UI 3.1, so it's a very fast and smooth phone from my experience. It's the Helio G80 processor and the Mali G52 GPU. Again, these aren't going to be, these super strong and tough processors, but they're mid-range chips. They get the job done for doing casual gaming, applications, stuff like that. It's not anything you're going to be going super crazy on. You do have micro SD support, 64 gigs or 128 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM, depending on your configuration. You also still retain the headphone jack on here, a pretty decently loud sounding single firing speaker, and then you also have NFC on this phone, as well as a under the display fingerprint sensor, which actually isn't bad. It's pretty accurate. I don't really have a massive issue with the fingerprint sensor. The best thing about these phones is actually the camera. So it seems like Samsung didn't cut huge corners with this phone with image quality. It has a 64 megapixel standard, an 8 megapixel ultra wide with a 5 megapixel macro and a 5 megapixel depth sensor. It also shoots in 1080p though, and you also have a 20 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 1080p. Overall, I was really happy with image quality. I got some really great detail, very nice, bright, and vibrant colors with the cameras on here. The ultra wide was pretty close to the main lens, and then you also have a pretty fun macro camera to play with as well. So the A32's cameras are actually pretty solid. So this phone has a massive 5,000 milliamp battery. So this phone can easily get a light user 2 to 3 days of screen on time, no problem. So you're getting really excellent battery life. So if you need a phone that's going to last you all day, this is definitely the phone for you. So overall, A32 is very solid. Next would be the Poco X3 Pro. Very cheap phone right now. It's like $250. It's extremely cheap, and this would be my personal favorite on the list. So it's got a full plastic design. Again, nothing too fancy. I'm not crazy about the design on here. I think it looks okay. But it's actually IP53 dust and splash proof, which is pretty nice. And you have a pretty big 6.67 inch IPS panel. So no, it's not an AMOLED or an OLED panel, but the IPS panel is fine. It gets fairly bright and pretty colorful. But the thing about this panel, it's a 120 hertz panel. So this is an extremely smooth phone. Just swiping and scrolling, playing games that are compatible with it. It is really nice. It's got a 1080p panel, 395 for the PPI, so it's fairly sharp, and you actually get pretty nice bezels on here and a punch hole, which is really nice. This is running Android 11 with MIUI 12, and you have the Snapdragon 860. So that's what I love about this phone. That is the highlight. You get an extremely strong processor for 250 bucks. This will pretty much max any game out that you play, PUBG, Call of Duty Mobile. It will play those games at high settings, zero problems. You got the Adreno 640 GPU along with micro SD support, 128 gigs of internal storage, and 6 or 8 gigs of RAM depending on your configuration. So this phone is just blazing fast with a ton of storage as well. You also have the headphone jack on here, and Xiaomi throws in some really nice stereo speakers on this guy. Very good bass quality, and they get pretty loud as well. So I really like the speaker quality on here. It has NFC and also the infrared port. I actually use this phone to control my TV and stuff like that because I constantly lose the remote. So that is one thing that I really love. And also another thing is that they did really well with this phone is that they put the fingerprint scanner on the power button. That is the best spot to put it. Very comfortable. Absolutely love it there. So it's a physical one, and I just love it. It's really nice. So as far as image quality on here, I would say that this doesn't have the best cameras on the list. I would probably rank it third on the list, but you do have a 48 megapixel standard, an 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro, and 2 megapixel depth, 4K video with a 20 megapixel selfie at 1080p. Like I said, images are pretty good when you get it in good lighting and stuff like that. But even compared to like the A32, I kind of prefer the stills on that phone. But this, as you can see from the photos, it takes pretty good shots. So I think any, casual photo taker would be fine with this phone. I didn't really have a huge issue. I just noticed that it wasn't as good as some of the other phones you'll see on this list. But the cameras are pretty solid on the X3 Pro. Now, another, highlight with this phone is the 5160 milliamp battery with 33 watt charging. So this thing charges pretty fast, and also battery life, again, 2 to 3 days of screen on time if you're a light user. So you're getting excellent battery life. That's why it's really ideal for gamers, because you get excellent battery life and a strong CPU GPU combo here. So I really like the X3 Pro here. Next is the iPhone SE 2020. So this is an awesome phone still. Believe it or not, you can find this for well under 300 bucks now. And I guess the only thing about this phone is the design. Yes, it still uses a sort of rehashed iPhone 8 design on here, but if you can get over that, it's a very nice phone. So it's actually a premium design. It's a glass back aluminum frame. It's actually IP67 dust and water resistant, and it has a Retina IPS display, so no OLED display on here. And it's kind of small at 4.7 inches, which I'm not gonna knock it, because there are a lot of people who really want a smaller phone that they can handle easily without having to shimmy it and do all that stuff. So it is a 720p panel, 326 for the PPI. Overall, it's a fairly sharp panel, especially for the size of it. So I don't have any issues with it really. It gets fairly bright as well. Here is where the the selling point is for this phone. This is the fastest phone, I think, still, as far as benchmarks, with the Apple A13 chip. This phone is extremely fast and smooth. I rarely see hiccups with this phone. It is very fast. Not only it will pretty much max any game out, no problem. And it's running iOS 15.1. Of course, this phone is going to get updates for years and years to come. So if that's a concern for you, this phone will probably have the the best longevity out of all of these phones. No SD card support, 64 gigs of internal storage, 3 gigs of RAM. Like I said, extremely powerful phone. So you do have stereo speakers, which sound pretty good. Not the best on the list, but they are there. So I really do like any phones with stereo speakers. NFC is on here. Touch ID and the home button is a must for some people. They don't like the gesture, so that could be another selling point for you. The home button is really nice, and Touch ID is always nice to have on here. Now, another good selling point with this phone is the cameras. The only thing about the cameras is they take excellent shots, but it's only one lens. So it's a 12 megapixel standard, so there's no ultra wide, no macro, no depth. It's just that one lens, but it does a very good job at taking photos. It shoots in 4K, 24, 30, or 60 FPS, and then a 7 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 1080p as well. Like I said, great selfies, just overall, just great photos in general. So that's another reason I still think this phone has the best video for a $300 smartphone as well. So battery life is also another drawback with this phone. It's a 1821 milliamp battery with 18 watts. And again, you probably get around 4 hours of screen on time with this phone. One of the plus with these phones is that they do have wireless charging, so that's a thing a lot of phones at this price point don't have. So it does have that. But overall, the SE is still an extremely solid option. Very powerful phone. Next would be the Xiaomi Redmi Note 10 Pro. Still one of my favorite looking phones this year as far as design. I still think this was the best looking phone to come out this year, in my opinion. Just a beautiful design on here. You got a glass back. It has a plastic frame, but it doesn't look like plastic. It looks like stainless steel, but it is plastic. It's IP53 dust and splash proof. Man, this is such a nice feeling and looking phone to me. I love how they did the camera module setup on here. It's a really sweet looking phone. You also have a AMOLED display at 120 Hz HDR10, so it's one of the best displays on this list. Bezels are pretty nice on here, the punch hole, and 120 Hz with an AMOLED screen. It is really nice to look at 6.67 inches, 1080p, 395 for the PPI. So just a very nice display, best display on this list by far. Android 11 with MIUI 12 is on here. The Snapdragon 732G and Adreno 618. It's a decent chip for doing casual stuff. It's not going to be like the Poco when it comes to gaming and stuff. It won't be going crazy with graphics, but it does a fairly good job. Again, this is more geared towards the casual smartphone user. You do have micro SD support, 128 gigs of internal storage, and 6 gigs of RAM. This phone also has stereo speakers as well, which sound pretty loud, and they get pretty good bass quality, but this phone also still retains the headphone jack, which is really nice. The NFC is on here as well as the infrared port, so you can also use this as a remote too. And then the fingerprint scanner, again, is side mounted. It's a physical one, which I absolutely love, in a very nice spot. So the main selling point with this phone is the display and the camera. So you have a very cool 108 megapixel camera on here. You get some really nice detailed shots on this phone. Then you also have an 8 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel macro, 2 megapixel depth with 4K video at 30 frames per second, and a 16 megapixel selfie at 1080p. So images are very good on the Redmi Note 10 Pro. I don't have any issues with it. Like I said, plenty of detail with this camera, and the ultra wide is pretty nice. Very good image processing, good color. Overall, I think you'll be pretty happy with the images that this phone produces. Now, you do have, again, a very beefy battery on here, a 5020 milliamp battery with 33 watt charging. So this thing charges fairly fast too. So you can easily squeeze 2 days battery life out of this phone easy. So the Note 10 Pro has a lot going for it. Beautiful design, beautiful display, and also a really great camera setup. All right, last we have the Moto G9 Power. So you can find this well under 300 bucks. And I really like this phone because it has a very unique thing that a lot of these phones do not have. So it does have a, just a regular plastic build on here, water repellent coating. It has a pretty big 6.8 inches, so it's a very big phone. It's an IPS panel, 720p 263 for the PPI. Again, nothing special. It's got a punch hole. Display is fine for what it is. It's got the Snapdragon 662 and Adreno 610. Again, a mid-range chip. It performs fine, especially with the near stock Android skin on here. It is really fine. It flies through applications and stuff like that. It's a very smooth phone. You also have on here micro SD support, 64 gigs of internal storage, and 4 gigs of RAM on here. You retain the headphone jack. The single firing speaker is okay. It gets fairly loud. You also have NFC on here. The fingerprint scanner is rear mounted on the back. It works really fine as well. This phone also has a pretty good camera setup, a 64 megapixel standard, 2 megapixel macro, 2 megapixel depth. And again, I wouldn't get this phone for the camera. Its highlights are really the near stock Android experience, and also the 6000 milliamp battery on here is absolutely nuts. So battery life is crazy. I could not kill this phone. I think I was like maybe at 50% the second day. Like I said, if you're a light user, it is extremely hard to kill this phone. It's got the biggest battery on this list. Absolutely nuts. 20 watt charging, which I wish was a little bit faster since you have such a big battery to charge, but man, is the battery life really good on this phone. So if you need a phone with just the absolute beast battery life, I would definitely consider this phone. Motorola says you can get a full 3 days of battery life, which I believe. But yeah, it's fine. So cameras are just okay. The specs are okay. It's not a super powerhouse, but this battery life and the near stock Android experience is really something to consider. So that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one.